Sure, but on the legal advice, were you and other cabinet ministers aware that the Attorney General's position had been very different until early February 2003?
I wasn't aware in any detail of this. I wasn't involved in discussions with the Attorney General. I wasn't involved in meetings with the Attorney General at all. We had this straightforward issue. We were sitting down, as a cabinet, to discuss the merits of taking action once the diplomatic avenues had been exhausted, unfortunately, and we had to have straightforward advice from the Attorney General. Was it lawful or was it not? His advice in the cabinet meeting was unequivocal.
So you, at that time, had not seen the formal written advice that he had presented to the Prime Minister on the 7th of March?
No, and I think that. Look, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an international lawyer. As I understand it, the constitutional position is very clear, that before a decision of such magnitude is made, the Attorney General has to say whether he thinks it is lawful or not. That was the straightforward question he had to answer. If he had answered equivocally in his statement to us, then of course there would have been questions, but he was very straightforward in his recommendation. To me, that was a necessary part of the discussion about the decision of war, but it wasn't sufficient because we had to look at the political and other case that had to be examined in the light of the period of diplomacy at the United Nations.
So you and other cabinet ministers, except, of course, for the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister, were not aware that the Attorney General's position had been equivocal only 2 weeks beforehand in his document of the 7th of March and had been indeed directly opposed to the position he took in Cabinet up to about the 11th of February? You were completely unaware of this, and you were unaware also that the Foreign Office's legal advisers, specialists in international law, did not agree with the position that the Attorney General presented to Cabinet.
I think there had been some press coverage about the Foreign Office. I may be wrong on that, but I think there may have been some press coverage.
The Foreign Secretary referred to some press coverage.
Look, the question that came before us was the advice of the Attorney General that this was lawful or not. The Attorney General gave unequivocal advice to the Cabinet. I think he has been along to the committee to explain the basis on which he gave that advice. I have heard him now give his evidence to the committee. But he had a straightforward question to answer. It wasn't a simple question, but it was a straightforward question. Was it lawful or was it not? And he gave an unequivocal answer.
You don't think the Cabinet needed to know whether this was based on a robust position or a slightly controversial position?
I think, in retrospect, people, as historians of this matter, will look at it very carefully and look at what happened and what was said between different people at different times and what were the first drafts, the second drafts and the third drafts. But the issue for us was very clear. I mean, we are a cabinet making a decision. Did the Attorney General, who is our legal officer responsible for giving us legal advice on these matters, have a position on this that was unequivocal? And his position on this was unequivocal. He cited, as I have already done, the United Nations resolutions that led to us believe that Saddam Hussein had failed to comply with international law. He cited 1441 and the importance of the final opportunity for Saddam Hussein. All these things were said and it laid the basis on which we could make a decision, but it wasn't the reason that we made the decisions. He gave us the necessary means to make a decision, but it wasn't sufficient in itself.
If you had known that his position had been equivocal only 10 days previously in formal advice presented to the Prime Minister, would it have changed your view?
I don't think it would have changed my view, because unless he was prepared to say that his unequivocal advice was that this was not lawful, then the other arguments that I thought were important played into place, and that was what I have already talked to you about. The obligations to the international community, the failure to honor them, the failure to disclose, the failure to discharge the spirit and the letter of the resolutions, particularly 1441. And I knew that there was a debate about whether 1441 should lead to a further decision or to a further discussion. I knew that that was an issue. But it seemed to me the Attorney General's advice was quite unequivocal.